What's going on, everybody? Thank you so much for tuning in. This is going to be a special segment dedicated to Black History Month. And I want to do a few segments like this before the month has concluded. I did put out the blast on the community tab, and many of you responded positively, saying that you did want to hear about, some Black history. And I want to take a little bit of a different angle. And the reason why is because, and it's good, by the way, that a lot of times Black history is celebrated. Right? We're like, as in our achievements are often celebrated, which is a great thing. And there are a lot of people who celebrate those achievements. Obviously, you've seen a lot of the politicians and a lot of the activists talking about the great things that we've achieved. However, oftentimes what gets overlooked are the obstacles. Some obstacles that unfortunately have reverberated into our history today. Things that have never really been reconciled, things that have never been dealt with or addressed, things that we don't see in the history books because, let's be honest, what happens today when we show the reality that we live in just in contemporary times, right? We mentioned Trayvon Martin. They call him a thug and they call him a murderer. They don't see, that it turned out Zimmerman was just really a bad guy. Eric Garner. The list really does go on. And so we don't ever get to hold up a mirror and say, look, this is society. And for you all to pretend like this stuff didn't exist, well, it's nonsensical. And one of the myths that I want to address today is the idea that Black people have never tried to come together, coalesce, build up their own community. And if we did, the idea that, we just weren't good at it or we weren't successful. Today, I want to talk to you about Greenwood, Oklahoma, which is in Tulsa. Is in the north side of Tulsa. Many of you may have heard about this, but some of you may have not. Greenwood, Oklahoma was known as the Black Wall Street. Just as a short premise, basically, a lot of slave owners took their slaves after slavery to Oklahoma. Oklahoma had a ridiculous amount of land, and a lot of it was claimed, surprisingly enough, or allowed to be claimed, I should say, by Black people. Of course, the first legislation that Oklahoma passed when it became a state is to segregate. What a surprise? Nobody's surprised. Okay, cool. Then something happened where Tulsa, Oklahoma began to rapidly boom. And then oil was discovered. Railroads came in, oil was discovered. As you can imagine, Black people were kept out of that wealth. However, because of the success of the overall city of Tulsa because of oil, they were able to profit in some ways. They were fortunate enough to be able to set up a little town on the north side of Tulsa that's called Greenwood. Now, in downtown Tulsa, south side Tulsa, it was segregated. Couldn't use the bathroom, couldn't do anything. And, but that was where most of the Black Tulsans lived, or worked at, not lived. Problem is they couldn't do anything after they got off work. Couldn't go have a drink at the bar, couldn't go play pool, couldn't go to the movie theater. Couldn't do anything. So where there is a demand, oftentimes you will absolutely find a supply, which was evident. Now, this supply led to Black Wall Street, or this demand led to what is now known as Black Wall Street. They created pool houses, dance halls, or what we will call clubs now. They created movie theaters. They created a big, huge church. A multiplicity of businesses. They were successful. They were very successful, actually. They were so successful that, of course, as can always be expected, the politicians and the police officers of the area always tried to flex their muscle at these residents in Greenwood, Oklahoma. Now, a young man named Dick Rowland Now, well, I guess I should premise by saying before that, there was an escalation of race riots that were taking place across the country because black people were becoming successful across the country. There were a plethora of successful black communities in the mid 1920s to late 1920s. I mean, this was like becoming the norm, and segregation actually was helping it. And that's not really outside of the norm either, because even when they segregated without segregating, without legalizing segregation in the inner cities and things like that, when they basically built railways and subways and bus stops and everything to only go to the suburbs, and then they skipped over the black communities. That's how black people got kicked out of factories. So it segregated us. That's how hip hop culture came to be. And now look what the dominant culture is around the world. Hip hop is the most listened to genre in the world. They dress like people in the hip hop industry. They dress like the very people that were segregated, and we all colloquially gained our own language, very similar to like Creole, how it came to be. Things like that. So segregation and isolation tends to develop a unique culture and does have some unique advantages that people, because that's what evolution is, right? You figure out what you have to work with and you work with it. And that's what happened in Tulsa. So they boomed because of segregation. Of course, when you intended for somebody to be lesser and they start becoming successful, you have to hold them back. So racial tensions were escalating in Tulsa, Oklahoma, as well as around the world. A kid named Dick Rowland had to use the bathroom. He was a shoe shiner. There was only one bathroom that black people could use. There was only one bathroom that black people could use. It was at the top of this huge building. He goes into the elevator, which I don't know if you've ever heard about this stigma, and this is a real thing. We're black men. We if there's a white woman in the elevator or a white passing woman in the elevator, we oftentimes create a lot of space and separate ourselves instinctually. And this incident has a lot to do why that has kind of been passed down, where you will see mothers grab their little boys and pull them closer to them in the elevator. And it's partially because of this incident. Dick Rowland was accused of attempted rape. Of course, this was a white woman, so they believed her. They arrested him, held him in jail. The long story short is they had a trial and they were basically going to lynch him. The black people of Tulsa finally got fed up because, like I said, the tension between the race relations was escalating. They finally got fed up. They went to go rescue Dick Rowland. And there was a altercation between a white guy and a black guy, a white guy and a black guy. The black guy had a gun. The white guy walked up to him, said, "Well, what are you going to do with that gun?" And you can imagine what explicative he used after that. And he said, "I'm going to use it if I have to," which actually, funny enough, at that point in time would have been well within his right. But at that point in time also, laws didn't always apply to black people. So that the gun went off while they were wrestling over it. That's when it started. From there, they left Dick Rowland alone, as you can imagine. And then the white people proceeded to burn Greenwood to the ground, because that's what it was really all about. They got tired of black people acting all uppity. They got tired of the success after they specifically went out of their way to make sure they were not successful. And that was the point of the segregation. That's why they kept them out of, managerial positions. They didn't allow them to own businesses in downtown Tulsa. So they burned Greenwood to the ground. But it got worse. The cops assisted this. They started deputizing white people and saying, you can arrest any black person that you see. This town was they weren't bothering anybody. They accepted the segregation laws. They couldn't do much about it. They worked within the confines of their community and society at the time. Still wasn't enough. The white people began arresting everybody. They burned. It cost about what today would be the equivalent of $5 billion worth of damage. Eventually, the National Guard came. The violence subsided. And you would think the National Guard coming would be a good thing, right? But that's not what happened. The National Guard did disarm the white men, but then they put the black people in internment camps. Yeah, they put them in internment camps. This is not an exaggeration. After they put them in internment camps, as you could probably expect, the economy of Tulsa actually started to crumble because all those mealy jobs that nobody wanted to do, that everybody thought was so unimportant. We don't need black people. Y'all need us type thing. It turns out that those jobs were important. Those black people were active contributors to society, and they did need black people for their economy to be sustained in Tulsa. Oh, but they were going to make sure that you were well behaved if they're going to release you. So you could be released only if you walked around with a tag of who your employer was. So after you got off work, you were finally set, you were set free. You go home to work, you come home from work. You were forced to stay in the tent. There were tent cities in Greenwood because they burned every single house to the ground. If more people knew about this story, and there are others, trust me, this is around the time of the Chicago riots as well. But this, to my knowledge, was the most violent riot because I think it's the record for the lives lost in a riot. It's about 300 people. Do you think people, if they learned about this at a young age in the history books, could constantly purport the idea that black people just haven't pulled themselves up by their bootstraps? They don't know how to get over their past. This was the norm. This wasn't happening only in the 20s and the 30s. This was consistently happening throughout history. Every single time that we would build, they would come and destroy. And yet we were portrayed as the ones who were violent. We were the ones who were portrayed as the ignorant ones. But yet we started our own businesses. We had our own town. We said, fine, have yours. We'll have ours. And it was bad. Now, here's what's interesting about this. This is kind of what happens now, but you don't see the same results. The Asian community does it, whether it's Southeast Asian or Eastern Asian. So I know for a fact Koreans do this. There's nothing wrong with it. I know the Jewish community does this at large. There's nothing wrong with it. The Arab and Desi community does this as well. Spending your money within your own community isn't a bad thing, especially given how we know that other people like to co-opt messages and profit off of it and cut people of color out of the profits. I get it. But in America, black people tried that first. And this was basically always the end result. In the communities that we have now, the hood, we're prevented from owning that stuff. That's not ours. The hood was meant to keep us docile, keep us trapped, keep us sucking from the teat of the white ownership and white government. We weren't allowed to even own businesses in our hood for the most part until very, very, mid-90s? Mid to early 90s when we finally were able to start owning businesses. Arabs and Asians, like East Asians, so Chinese, Korean, they were allowed to own businesses in our neighborhoods before we were. So we've been making an attempt to do this. And that's why I think it's important to talk about this type of history as well, because it is not taught in the history books for a reason, because that would cause society to have to self-reflect and say, well, damn, if we would have continued on the trajectory that our ancestors had set for us, wealth inequality amongst races would not be anywhere near what it is today. Because look at all those business owners that we saw in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And like I said, that those weren't the only ones. And then in the 90s, when we finally started to begin to own businesses again, finally, gentrification comes. And now we're getting pushed out again. Because we don't have the wealth to combat gentrification. Because every time we started to gain said wealth, we were pushed out and shut down. Now, you can be wealthy now, but it's a different type of wealth. Most of the time, it's slowly changing, but that wealth oftentimes comes from working as a CEO, as a VP. Basically, you are a face, a puppet of another corporation that actively participate in the oppression of Black businesses. So the only way that you can become rich is by working for them, who are infinitely richer, and then staying in line. So you're not an owner of yourself. You're merely owned, but better paid. Some food for thought. We'll have some more of these segments coming on down the line, and I hope you enjoyed this one. Let me know what you think. And hey, more than anything else, I know it's a hard life out there, and there's a lot to celebrate. But it's important to reflect on our history as well, and we have to do a little bit of both. And that's why I always say, always remember, find your balance. Peace. Thanks for watching that segment of Mi Casa es Su Casa. You can donate to our Patreon and keep helping the network grow by clicking on the link in the description below. And also, make sure you join us at JustNForm.com. And finally, make sure you subscribe to us on Roku and be part of the very first independent news network on Roku TV. But more than anything else, always remember, find your balance. Peace.